Chileo with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is the moon hour, and the moon is 6 degrees Sagittarius, conjoining my Ketu, and ascendant 29 degrees Sagittarius. So this is a great time to predict scammy ritual abuse, real estate, and investment. So this is Jupiter 22 degrees Cancer, um, in the eighth house, and the midheaven is right on Mercury in Libra. This is something that I've been seeing around a lot, and it's called private equity. So this is the best explanation I saw. In fact, it's the first thing I clicked on about Marketplace APM, and that explains private equity. Watch this video as many times as you need, because that's going to um, be another link in the understanding of whether you are a prospective landowner or prospective house owner, a tenant, somebody that just seeks for a place to live, somebody that escaped human trafficking, an occultist or an astrologer, tarot reader, holistic health practitioner, lawyer, a student, or literally everyone. Y'all heard about the Epstein list, and let me talk about the concept of private equity and how that associates with both Epstein list, targeted individuals, things that you thought are only science fiction, uh, and your pension, your housing, and your investments. So I am not an investment advisor, nor am I a child eater. That is a correlation. and, and um, let's talk about the entire structure of the dumbfuckery. So we can start from the petering, or we can just start from house ownership. So let's say you bought a house. Oh my God, most people don't even believe they have the possibility to buy a house. I understand that. Um, so let's talk about peterings. A petering is something that happens in a house in an estate. Now, that estate is usually owned by something that is associated with what's being called private equity. This is because when it comes to the monarchies or the aristocracy, they kind of own the estate and do the real estate business. There are people who want to have a piece of the cake, and they actually do either the crime for them, like Detru or Epstein, or Diddler. Okay, think about Diddler. Okay, think about a black man living in America, um, growing into a situation where it's like, well, you can do, you can rap, you can sing, but to make some money, and to make some money doing music, there are other things that they're expected to do, like being an informant. Um, then they understand that if they can apply to whatever the problems of the high society where the money at is, then they basically can solve their own problems. Now, growing up in a world where everybody would kill everybody for yes, for um, that's not really a society and an environment that encourages um, kindness. Okay, at the very least. Um, with those situations, people would get a couple of people would get a hold over an estate, for example. And the way they would do that is with private equity. So if there are a couple of people that don't have the credit score, that don't have the clean cut profile, that don't have any of that, they can hook up with a dealer and say, listen, we need to get people with a clean cut budget to provide for an estate for us for so and so time to do so and so things. And this is how people can get to the idea of private equity. A lot of people don't have money to buy a house, so they're being told they can take a loan and invest in a property. But even if they can take a loan, they don't really have either the means to take a loan, or they don't actually have the yes, they don't actually have the money to buy a house. And what they do is they gather in investment funds. In Israel, we get a lot of advertisement about investing in an equity in real estate. And in 2008, we got a lot of offers to buy houses in the United States, and I'm like, they just had a major financial crisis. That's not something that I would. That's people that committed suicide in their homes, lost their homes to tremendous disasters, and those people are gonna need housing. So I was just like, I just see dumb fuckery. It's like I see dumb fuckery 12 o'clock, because this is where people, let's be a little bit practical. Um, when people begin to do crime, it's usually something that takes another trajectory and another trajectory and another trajectory and another trajectory, and it's quite difficult to get out of. Now, it's not their fault, but when people are, getting into that, at least let them be informed that they're getting into a path that to get out of is difficult, and try to plan the way out already, because they will need to provide for either these houses or a way for their own family to run out of the concentration camp when the Nazis get to their city. Okay, I talked about investing in real estate in China and the fact that they are going to cash in on the investors and confiscate the land. Now, if that is not even an investment, or and close the banks and and so on and so forth. So again, it's not judging people that do that do these things, um, but it's definitely raising awareness so we can have more points of interferences. So what private equity is, and this is the advertisement that we see in Israel: invest in a private equity. You put in so and so money. That private equity loans in also your name so and so money from the bank to buy a certain property. That in the prospective decision, that just like you flip a house, you basically buy that place, flip that place, arrange that place, and then sell it some years later in profit. Now, here's the deal for the investor side. For the investor side, basically, what will be done in the estate is not something that they're being told. You're not even the house owner, and you don't even pick the tenants. What is actually being done is, with a little bit of layering, they are going to put in a diddler. And then it can be done in such a way where, let's say you have a nice complex. You have a lot of families living in that complex, several apartments, or one apartment from that complex is going to be supposedly a brothel, is basically a human trafficking hub, that is of informant kind of elite petering. And it is ranks, it might not be but this is pretty much how it's done, also from an apartment or a condo to an island. And the issue is that, while this may be used as some sort of a safety house, it's actually a trafficking house. So basically, one of the people will begin to run away from human trafficking. And the way that they do that, they do a ritual on the estate. So, for example, when I just moved into the estate, I had a neighbor that was smoking, and she had problems with her throat chakra. She's basically coughing all the time, having those allergies. No, she was smoking. I'm sorry. Her daughter, had allergies. And since I'm an aromatherapist, she asked me what to do about that. Well, let's say perhaps use a rosemary, but I saw that the mother is smoking, and I was kind of, to be very honest, evading the question. because I would have to take care. I just moved in, and I would have to take care of the mother's, um, of what's behind the fact that the mother is smoking, which is, and she is my neighbor. And then it was me being, um, kind of like swiping that under the rug, trying to think about black pepper or rosemary, and trying to light some rosemary incense in my own house. So basically, this is throat chakra problems, and that would have to do with something um, that I'm not going to get into too deeply, but throat chakra is very much correlating with the second sex chakra and has to do with relational. So, also, the first year, the couple is fighting all the time. Only the first year. For me, I moved in, I was working on my own tantric embodiment and so on and so forth, and trying to find my power in the face of psychic attacks. That improved upon the energy of my neighbors that basically began to stop fighting, start making more love, and being more vocal while doing that. And so they had another child. There were rituals on me because I began to work the soil. And when I was told, okay, I'm not the second year, the third year, I'm not raising the rent, but I'm going to have for you to pay for the water. You've been using the water excessively, and I'm like, okay, that person, they just want to have their own. They manage the estate, and they just want to have their own money. They don't know how to tell me that, so they talk about water, and I'm like, okay, fine. Like I'm like, I felt like it was an okay price, and so on. But what I didn't know is that there were rituals done to try to humiliate and traffic, and it was a four apartment complex, where basically one of the estate that the condo I was getting into was the one that was sacrificed in favor of the cult. I did not know that, because you see, and this is how, for the tenant perspective, they would see families live there 3 years, 4 years. You know these complexes where they do long-term rent? I just think about it as I'm speaking to you, because they do this long-term rent, and then even a person say, okay, I don't care what they do, this brothel thing, let them do what they want. No, they're doing rituals on the entire estate. I had a neighbor downstairs that were constantly saying mantras, and and that would mean that she would constantly be angered and pissed trying to get something off. Mantras is something that Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Mantra is something that is usually done. Um, Again, when the person is doing that, once a day or something like that, or that's really nice. But usually, when a person is constantly telling mantras, is they're trying to clear something off of their own chart. And then there was another single mom with a daughter, and I learned that there was something mixing with the electric bill, because they were buying an electric car, and the first they put it on my neighbor's. It was probably by mistake, but put it on my neighbor's electricity. Okay, so that was a lot of time. It was actually bus drivers that told me about this estate. Now they thought that I was being, from their perspective, I was being trafficked. So like, oh, you live so and that and that. But in a way, perhaps they were also insinuating that, hey, that place is kind of like, we know where you live, we know where it is, we know where that, and and to me, I just, let's just say there were a lot of women drivers later. And yeah, I mean that's who I am. Now, from the perspective of the investors, y'all ain't gonna know. If you invest in private equity, first of all, if I'm in Israel, we get advertisements to invest in private equity in Cyprus. In everybody's like Palestine. No, Palestine. Everybody knows about that. I'm talking about the things that look legit. Okay. Invest in private equity in Greece. Invest in private equity in Cyprus. Invest in private equity in the United States. I mean, now everybody knows the United States is a flop, but because people have had it in the 2008 crisis, but they're still trying. People hear the word Section 8 in Israel, and they get the nay. And so and from the perspective of the investor, you're like investing in something supposed to be long-term rent complex or a business complex, and you're like, oh, that's cool. But the rituals that are done will also affect your life, which means that those rituals are basically rituals that are going to the finances, going to the health, going to, the many things that people are dealing with. Um, and so this is where the rituals are basically done with the really, really what they call low vibrational energy. It's done by torturing people, and they're basically summoning energies, call it demons, entities, whatnot, but the summon energies that are basically supposed to make it impossible to grow for the people. And then those people are supposed to pray to a certain god so that god will protect them. And this is okay. In Israel, we have it, the psalm and so on. Now, in the beginning, it looks like it works. You pray, you read psalm, you do that, but then you understand there's something missing, because those they want you to get more religious, but they don't provide for child rights, women rights, and so on, and even try to take a creative energy of people, take ideas, isolate people, and so on and so forth. So from the perspective of the investor, this is going to be a bubble pop, because what's going to happen is that the tenants are going to run. They're not going to be able to even pay the rent, because either they're running from human trafficking, and then they legally broke a contract because they are escaping for their life from a ritually abusive state. And for a lot of people, it's going to be their stuff are there and so on. So, and it was like, this is trespassing. It's not trespassing. It's a person that deserves of diplomatic immunity worldwide, because because they are escaping traffickers. Now, from the perspective of the investors, they try to collect the money. The authorities can't collect the money, because you can't legally collect the money from a person who is running from a trafficking cult. Also, they are eligible. They are eligible to diplomatic immunity. They probably have contacted the taxes, the state, the internal Ministry of Internal Affairs. They've contacted everyone. Maybe they even run a business, and all of their papers are in that apartment. So they've contacted the tax offices, and basically they've been doing they've been doing their due diligence to the best of their ability. And those people that are supposedly after them are basically being exposed as criminals. And they know that, so they try to connect the particular lawyers that would be connected with criminals. And this is where the business gets rowdy, because you, the investor, is not even going to know about this at this level. They might not inform you. They might not inform you that there's anything wrong. They might not inform you. So you could spend years invested in such a complex, not even knowing what's happening, because you are invested in a private equity. Not only that, our pensions are invested in those things. And the pensions is something that people are obligated to invest in, whether through a workplace or or when they open a business. Okay? And so, as the people begin to escape those trafficking hubs, they become targeted individuals, which means that they have to learn about the occult, the astrology, the mission behind targeting individuals, which is to get people homeless, and they are forced to learn about the state. So here's a little shadow work in public for you. What I told in a previous episode, that when I was born and my parents divorced, my mama said to my father, they lived in two different countries. So my mama said to, they lived in the same country, and then my father would go to Netherlands. So my mama said to my father that that the daughter stays with her, um, which of course would have a Dutch nationality, and the father did indeed when I was 16 years later, 10 years later, no, 14 years later, um, the father still made sure that I will have my nationality, and so on and so forth. There was an attempt of a Dutch realtor to traffic me when me and my mom were in Netherlands, which is how it would be later difficult for me to acquire the language, because those traumas affect language acquisition. And so I um, basically that was the agreement between the parents, and basically that the apartment would be staying with my family. However, for a single mom to raise a single daughter with all the trafficking rings, attempt to sexually harass her at workplaces, attempt to prevent her from having a business that is her own, not marketing to her business, because she wasn't going with the equivalent of a Mormon cult. She wasn't going to be raped for financial security and for a housing, so she was targeted all her life, and she couldn't turn to like the welfare because they would traffic me. So basically, I grew up not really knowing about all of this, but I definitely grew up with the wound that when I was young, my mama told me, at least my daughter will have a house, and then we have to sell that house. When I was a teenager, I was like, what's the problem? I'll work, I'll save money, I'll buy a house. It's supposed to be simple. Except that there was quite some corruption in workplaces, inhumane working conditions, and I became so sick physically and emotionally that the only way out was like, okay, maybe I'll study a degree and have opportunities open to me. I study a degree, I do, not even, I would say groundbreaking, but it's not at all groundbreaking, because I'm so fucking certain there are billions of people that were doing the same researches that I was doing and are targeted individuals right now. Some of them, according to what I've been through, probably most of them are not with us. And so this is where I didn't even believe, like a lot of Gen Zers, that I didn't even believe that I can own an estate. And whenever I had to move out or to seek another apartment or whatnot, um, basically I began to completely collapse, because housing and even house owning became a trauma. So from that perspective, when I would run into those trafficking rings, it's like, well, now I have to deal with that. What do I do? Learn about real estate and share the news, which is how I was exposed to so much information that is going to be so very useful for so many people that are honest, hardworking people that just want to own an estate and just want their children to have a home. So when it comes to this private equity, it's basically how you layer up the phases, but also how that equity, that property will later be laden with curses. The tenants are going to move away, break contracts, not being able to pay the rent or get in debt. Like even if they weren't trafficked, so suddenly they would have a financial crisis, get in debt, kind of like the subprime that we had. Um, and nobody's able to pay that debt because to begin with, those that put them in debt were trying to enslave them, but they also lose their ability to work unless they tend to the things that are actually creating something beautiful in the world and in their lives, which again faces them with the challenges of those who try to enslave them. Now, you would think, okay, they want to depopulate. Um, yeah, but they also are trying to take the creative energy from people because to do all these rituals on the trafficked children, the trafficked people, to get a person to be trafficked, they need to put in a lot of work. And that work is in a direction that is not of the light. And that drains their energy. So basically, they try to make people homeless, then pay them to target other people that do have homes. And this is how they try to kidnap people, forcibly put them into all kind of situations, forcibly get people to be heroin addict, forcibly do, all the accidents or the car accidents. They tried to do that to my mom. So they get a person in a car accident, then they have to have something that is, some anesthesia and something like that. So they begin to smoke something or they begin to take something that is prescribed, um, but then they're basically kidnapped and put into substances that they're not aware of or given medications that are very, very addictive. And then they are forced to commit crimes because they are on drugs. Now, when I was in Netherlands, when I was in between homes, there was a lady that was addicted to heroin, and she was basically working for the security of a red light district. And when she had no substance, then she needed to basically do sex work. And she told the way that she told me, like she was the person that everybody were turning to for their problems, but nobody was listening to her. And in fact, the first time we met, she was like, don't talk to me about your problems." So she began to set the boundary. And I was working with mint essential oil, that is, by the way, associated with this Archangel Michael, but it's just an awareness causing oil. And she said, "What is this mint thingy?" She began to smell in the nostril that she used to sniff the heroin. And shortly afterwards, she tried to stop taking the drugs by herself. And the environment, the shelter that we were in, were not willing to open the doors to just let her have water with sugar because she was sweaty from the withdrawal effects. Then she was in a quarantine in COVID. She was clean for like the time of the quarantine, um, but unfortunately, there was no support of her to get off the drugs. In fact, she could only have prospective housing when she is on the drugs. Now, it's very important to have housing for people that have drug issues. In fact, in Finland, they did housing first, independently of ability to work, and believe in the patient to treat the double ailment, which means mental crisis and drug addiction. At the same time, we also don't want to wait until a person is in that situation for them to have and access to resources. Um, Now that I talk about all of this, I hope that you, the viewers, will be a little bit more cautious if you see notices for private equity investors, because basically the next line up on the targeting individuals would be the people that were invested in those scams. Now, because all of us have pensions, it means that that all of us are susceptible, and usually it's something that we cannot just legally stop paying for the pension. Um, and what would happen is that that pension, unbeknownst to us, would have another layer of investment that would be invested in private equity. Now imagine private equity, but on pharmaceutical companies. Private equity, but on insurance bolicolies. Bolicolies are the bonds and stocks that the insurance and the banks buy for their employees. They usually, when they say if there is a big financial crisis, the last to go are the bolicolies, not with private equity. So now, how does one get out of that fuckery? Well, first of all, awareness. From the murder and kidnapping of Madeleine, to kidnapping people and forcibly getting them addicted, to trafficking people, to get people to be targeting individuals, to political assassination. Um, it's basically all attack on the light. It's basically the type of rituals that people do and the type of energy that people summon to basically attack other people. For example, when I lived in the estate in Arad, it was 3 years, and I tried to purify the energy for 3 whole years. I tried to purify the energy for 3 whole years until I find out that um, that 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 I'm trying to purify basically the landlord and their realtor. It's satirical, but when you are um, basically in the light, then everything that's not of the light is going to fall apart like 9/11 after 9/11 after 9/11. By the way, when I was in Netherlands, um, I remember the moon was in Scorpio, and one of the things that was kind of like this intuition is like there was this joke in the astral, and it was, how do you call 9/11 in simple English? Um, and I was like, what? What? Why 9/11? And I was like, fair trade. So, as terrible a disaster that it is, um, the rituals around what is traded there have to do with a lot of kidnapped and tortured children that are basically are done to get to the frequency that summons those weird energies that attack people. And people like Anneke Lucas that survived being trafficked to those elite Peter rings, um, and those trafficked also had to perpetrate crimes and so on and so forth. For me, I was not willing to do crime. So there was like I was not willing to do crime. So that was like very confusing for feels like it's astrologer, she's doing astrological magic. She's not willing to do crime. What do you do? Not willing to target individuals. And like, what do you do? Then um yeah, she's spiritual. She calls on She talks about Jesus. She talks about that. Maybe she would. She goes against the human trafficking, Peter Ring, the Mormons and Opus Dei and the Vatican. Like she's very confusing. So that is basically, and then when we do, and you know when Alandra talked about that, and he was groomed to be in Epstein. When he talked about it, like when we call on for the solution, it begins to arise. And while the battle is real, I'm not, trying to pretend that it's not. But also, the more and more people becoming more and more aware and questioning more and more things that we haven't tended to. Things like having a childhood trauma where your parents say, "My daughter at least will have a house," and you as a child don't understand the big deal. It's like you go, you work, you make money, you have a house. What's the problem? And then you try to go to work, you can't stand on your feet for so many hours, you begin to get angry. What's happening? They go, they sell meat products. They say, okay, let's try to be vegetarian. Do you have vegetarian solutions in in the restaurants? Yes, you can eat that, but it's not going to be. You're not going to be satiated with that. You can eat like I don't know. Can I have just like you can a hamburger without a hamburger? That's so cool. But can I have like the rice schnitzels or the salad? No, you cannot. Why only the higher ranking? Okay. Do you want to be higher rank already or working here for so many years? And I'm like, okay, let's try. Well, you have to close this branch. You have to get at 1 a.m. Like I'm a single girl. You get paid for the taxi. What taxi? 1 a.m. What taxi? I'm alone. I have to take a taxi alone to my home. Jean-Claude Van Damme would have said no. So I have to resign. That was McDonald's. And that's just one attempt to work, make a living, save for a house, buy a house, invite my mama to the house. Because my mama had the dream of having a farm with like a lot of natural juices and all, and and I'm like, that makes sense. And I was born into a family where my mama was creating and my mama was having a business and this and that. And everybody tried to keep her from having a business. But still, for me, and she told me, like, never open a business because it took me so long to close the business and so long with the bureaucracy. Da, 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 da. And I was like afraid to open a business. So I had a wound around having an apartment and opening a business. Then I tried to do the shadow work of like getting out of that wound. When I was working for an international business as a contractor, I was trying to get out of that wound, and I was trying to work on business models and trying to work on, you know, asking more for myself and manifesting and so on. And then I get into those bureaucracy, taxation problems. Um, but in the essence, it's basically working around the rituals that are summoning um, tremendous survivalistic fears and keeping people in perpetual survivalistic situation. And if I sound a little bit JFK, then I also have a story about that on another episode.